Hello and bienvenido, San Antonio. Welcome to the Alamo Hour, discussing the people, places, and passion that make our city. My name is Justin Hill, a local attorney, a proud San Antonian, and keeper of chickens and bees. On the Alamo Hour, you'll get to hear from the people that make San Antonio great and unique and the best kept secret in Texas. We're glad that you're here. Okay, welcome to the Alamo Hour. This is episode 11, and I've got Mikal Watts on the podcast today. Mikal is a trial lawyer. Over the past 25 or so years, I'm guessing now, Mikal.
More like 30.
Okay, 30. Well, you got out early. Mikal's been at the forefront of many areas of litigation on a national stage, Ford Firestone, all the stuff you see on TV. Have you been hurt by this drug? He's been involved in a lot of those. He's really been kind of one of the few players on a national level for a long time regarding a lot of national torts. So for our city, that means a lot of things. We've got one of the biggest lawyers in America here, officing here with us, protecting our rights, and I wanted to get him on here to talk about a few things. It's really important timing, and I bugged him about the important timing. Atlantic Monthly just did an article on Mikal. It's the 10-year anniversary of the BP blowout, which we're going to get into this, but that had so many implications on you as a human, you as a lawyer, and everything else. So we're going to talk about that. But I wanted to get you on here, talk about being a lawyer on some of the biggest stages, talk about being indicted by the feds, talk about what you learned in those scenarios, and then what you're doing now. So I always start these with a little color commentary. I didn't prompt you on this, but it's a little top 10 list I like to go through, get some of your feelings and views on San Antonio, okay?
All right.
Thank you for being here.
Sure.
I also want to throw in the reason I live in San Antonio is Mikal Watts. I cold called him coming out of law school and said I want a job, and he gave me a job and said which city. He had 6 offices, and I said you pick, and he picked San Antonio. So you're the reason I live here.
Well, with a haircut like mine where you're completely bald, I needed some lawyers without hair, and you had a pretty good resume, but man, what a great haircut.
You have matching hair now, though.
Exactly.
You used to have a little.
All I got to do is grow out the beard, and I'll be Justin Hill.
All right, so how long have you lived in San Antonio?
Moved here in 2006, so going on 14 years.
All right, I moved here in 2007, and you had just moved here, you and your wife and kids, and sort of set up shop. Right now, we're in sort of COVID shutdown, so it's sort of a funny question, but at our house right now, we're doing our best to support local and help some of our small businesses and help some of our small restaurants. What restaurants are you reaching out to try to help?
It's really not restaurants. It's kind of an epic joke in my law firm that we go to Papa Nacho's in Leon Springs like 4 times a week because I like the margaritas. And so I'm just terrified that they're going to shut down. And so I have lunch there every day.
Are they open?
They are open for takeout.
Okay.
And we go in there and I ordered the same chicken Diablo and Grey Goose and soda, and Frank orders some Papa Nacho's salad and a Don Julio Añejo with a big cube ice.
They have margaritas to go.
They do.
Well, thanks for not bringing a jug of them down here.
That's nice. I've got many political differences with Greg Abbott, but the most brilliant thing he's ever done is when he said we're going to shut down, but we're going to let restaurants do their deal. And oh, by the way, you can take alcohol home from them. And I was like, we're in.
And that's just a mess. I mean, there's so many laws they got to jump through, and they're just kind of everybody's ignoring it, which I appreciate.
Yeah.
Okay, so I ask everybody this question. I think it's a fun question. You've got people that come to town and they say, I'm new to San Antonio. What should I? Okay, the Riverwalk and the Alamo. And then I always say there's the PhD tourist places. So hey, you've done all that. You really got to go see these hidden gems in San Antonio. For me, it's the Japanese tea garden, the rest of the missions, the botanical garden. I mean, those are some of those things. Okay, you've done all the other stuff. You got to go check these things out. What are your hidden gems that you sort of tell people, go check these things out?
Man, when we moved to San Antonio, there's nothing more fun than going to have a lunch coma at some of the famous touristy spots.
Sure, Mi Tierra.
Mi Tierra. I mean, literally, we would come down here. My wife and I would get a hotel room downtown and stay on the Riverwalk and think we were vacationing. And literally, we'd go in and have lunch and a couple too many margaritas and sleep the afternoon away. So we nicknamed it the lunch coma. So I love that. I like hanging out at the Pearl.
Yeah,
I think it's pretty cool. And then I think some of the restaurants. I mean, some of the museums that we've got. I think the Whitty is a cool place to
underrated.
Hang out. Yeah, I like to take kids there. So that's fun. And then I spent a lot of time outside the Dominion where I live, and so a lot of stuff in the 1604 area, a lot of stuff in the Rim. And then when you go out there, I mean, frankly, as you go west, Hill country gets really cool in a hurry.
You know, I always heard the hill country was Kerrville, and then somebody finally took me to Rock Springs, and I thought, oh, wow, this is just so different.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. A couple of years ago, I'm working on these California fire cases, and an entire town burned down in 2018. And so we set up an office there to go help these people out, and there was no housing, and there was nowhere for my staff to stay, so I bought a travel trailer. And we moved it out there, and of course, like a dumbass, I paid $85,000 for this travel trailer thinking everybody would live there, but there was nowhere to hook it into, so there was no sewage, no electricity, so it was kind of a waste. But my son has kind of taken it over, and he's in college right now, but he's living in this travel trailer. And so I said, Brandon, you know, where are you gonna stay? And he goes, oh, all the travel trailers are picked out, you know, so nothing in San Antonio and not even in Bernie. So he finds this place way on the other side of Bernie. And I go visit him. Real nice place, bunch of winter Texans up there, but it happens to be in welfare up on top of the hill.
Yeah.
To which my joke to Brandon is, great, I've got a son living on welfare, you know. So it's a cool spot out there.
Welfare right next to Comfort, which has always been funny to me.
So you got Popo's, one of the most fattening, excellent restaurants. That's one of the special spots in San Antonio as well.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I've never been. I've never been to Papa Nacho's either. I don't know if I'll get there unless
Margs
I come
at
out.
Papa Nacho's, the chicken fried steak at Popo's.
Okay.
You're living large.
All right. So I asked you this when I was a baby lawyer, and I remember your answer. I want to ask you now, who's the best lawyer you ever saw in trial that made you think just, wow, you're good?
Man, I got to tell you, lots of fabulous trial lawyers hitting big verdicts and like that, but I think the best lawyer I've ever seen is Rusty Hardin.
Okay. That's a new answer.
Yeah, you know, my daughter, when I was going through the criminal indictment that we're going to talk about, she had a friend named Eugenio Duran, who's a kid that is clerk for me here and you know, great friend of the family. And he was tight with the Clemens boys, who both played baseball at the University of Texas. And one of the Clemens boys, Casey, reached out to Eugenio and said, hey, I heard what's happening to your dad. I'm the only person in America that knows what you're about to go through. And so they became our dear friends, and they watched out for my daughter and everything like that. And so the Clemens boys, I mean, I would charge through a wall for them. I think they're wonderful. But in that sense, I got to know Rusty Hardin.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, I think the whole world thought that Roger Clemens was crazy testifying the way that he did and that maybe he was in trouble and da-da-da-da. And then one great trial lawyer and one great cross-examination completely shredded that prosecution for the farce that it was.
Sure.
And, you know, I think Rusty Hardin is as good as they get.
Yeah, and a good friend of mine, Derek Hollingsworth, did a lot of the work on that case too.
Yeah.
And I mean, I got sort of some of the inside track, but yeah, Rusty. You have not taken up his fancy suits though.
No, I'm not really a fancy suits kind of guy, but I'll tell you, I mean, I'm suing Princess Cruise Line over this COVID-19 thing, and I've got a bunch of cases, and Rusty just signed up one of the death cases, and he calls me out of the blue, and of course, I just remember the exhilaration of knowing that I'm going to get to work up a case with Rusty Hardin, and that's the fun thing about what I do is working up cases with great lawyers, and I don't consider that a measuring stick of who's better and who's this or that, but getting to work with great lawyers is a thrill, and Rusty's certainly one of them.
Yeah. I will say that about you. I mean, I'm not going to say no ego. I mean, you've got incredible success, but you are always very happy to work with other lawyers and learn from them, and I've tried to implement that in my life.
That's why they call it practicing law. I mean, all we do is plagiarize and rip off other people's techniques.
Yeah, and hopefully we can let them do it for us if we got something right.
I'm 30 years in, and I'm still learning.
Yeah, I mean, even now when I reach out to your firm, Michael, everybody helps me with whatever I need.
They better.
So I ask everybody, I know too much about you as opposed to some of my guests, but things I want to ask you, this is mine. I'm going to be selfish. How does faith guide your work as an attorney and a trial lawyer? I mean, you're a very faithful man, and we are an industry that is too often sort of put in a pigeonhole of being greedy or just crappy people generally is how people try to portray us. And how does faith guide you? How does it affect your motivations? And what do you think are the most important things that help you get through day to day as a trial lawyer with your faith?
Well, you know, when I got married, I really lacked faith, but I married a woman that was incredibly faithful, and my wife runs a prayer ministry for folks that have been put through trauma. I'm going to put it politely, and she kind of steered me that way. And in 1995, at a Promise Keepers rally at the Texas Stadium in Dallas, where the Cowboys play, accepted Jesus Christ my Lord and Savior, and it's an important part of my life. I don't I don't judge people, and I don't impose my faith on other people, but I do believe in a certain ethos. You don't cheat on your wife. You don't cheat on your partners. You don't steal. You don't lie. Try to be honest. And then, you know, the other thing I would say is, you know, to whom much is given, much is expected. And both back in 2008 and again this quarter, we've got a lot of people here in San Antonio that are hurting through no fault of their own.
Yeah.
And I will never forget, after Lehman Brothers fell off in 2008, just looking at the guys that were begging on the street corners. They looked like me and you, Justin.
Yeah.
I mean, there were guys with families and kids who lost their jobs through, in that case, a bunch of criminal activity from bankers, in this case because of a virus. And I think we all, as citizens of San Antonio, our first and highest obligation is to our fellow citizens. And I don't know whether you saw it, but a few weeks ago, the Express News had that picture of thousands of cars outside the San Antonio Food Bank. And I've never been more motivated by a picture in my life. And so I've tried to cause all the lawyers, the trial lawyers, to step up and to help because there are people right here in our community, through no fault of their own, they're going to go hungry. They're going to run out of money. They're going to run out of food, and we got to help them. So that's not necessarily faith-led, although it's certainly indicative of what the gospel teaches us. But it's damn sure something we ought to be doing.
Sure, moral compass. I mean, whether it's faith or inherent, I mean, it's all part of the same.
There's a bunch of people, particularly on the south side of this town, on the east side of this town, that are going to get hit harder by this thing than I am.
Yeah.
And I think you're an absolute jackass if you can't look 10 miles away and see that people are hungry and try to do something about it.
Yeah. No, I think everybody appreciated that. You made a very large donation to the food bank. We've tried to help as we can, and we're helping with giving refurbished laptops to a GED program because, I mean, it sort of transcends all things, not just food. I mean, people need to be educated, and people need to be able to have something when this ends, which I'm very optimistic it's going to end. I've had people to say it's not going to end, but I'm going to believe
I'm on. I mean, of course it's going to end it someday, but I'm really, really worried that that we're reopening too soon and we're going to have a second phase. I'm a big history buff, and I believe that we study history to avoid the mistakes of the past. And if you look at what happened in 1918 with what they call the Spanish flu, which, by the way, didn't originate from Spain.
Started in Kansas.
It did start in Kansas with the United States military.
Yeah.
And, the bottom line is all the military powers in World War I had censorship rules that you couldn't write about anything that would reflect poorly on the military. Well, Spain was neutral in World War I, so its doctors were the only ones writing about the flu that was ravaging everybody.
I didn't know that.
So it was nicknamed the Spanish flu. But the point that I was making is that in the spring of 1918, of course, it was a bad flu. It didn't kill everybody, but it was highly infectious, and then it mutated. And everybody took it easy. It mutated, and then by the fall, when flu season started, it killed 150,000 Americans in 1 month. And so I'm very, very concerned that in the name of reopening the economy, for either presidential aspirations or for just economic good intentions, that we're going to create a second round of this in the fall that's going to be far more damaging.
I think everybody's in agreement that there is going to be multiple rounds of this. It's just how well can we manage it?
Doesn't have to be. I mean, we've got to do the right thing. I mean, and I'm a huge fan of the mayor, but I personally, I don't lobby the mayor very often. But I remember about 6 weeks before Fiesta, he still hadn't called it, and he didn't want to call it. And I called him up, and I said, Mayor, you cannot take this chance. I said, if you create this huge, pandemic of people dying of coronavirus because we wanted to watch a bunch of people in a parade. And all you got to do is look what happened in New Orleans. I was in New Orleans. I was supposed to try a case in early March, and I was in New Orleans the week before Mardi Gras, and it had one case in the entire state. And then they some dumbass made the decision to hold Mardi Gras, and now they're the third or fourth largest state, and it's all because of that event.
Yeah.
So these people that say God will protect us and everything's great, God gives us free will, and we can make smart decisions or stupid decisions. And I encourage everybody here in San Antonio and elsewhere, let's be smart about this. Let's wear the masks. Let's stay isolated to the extent we can, and learn about Zoom so that you're not psychologically isolated. Talk to people over the computer, but do not put yourself in a position where you're spreading this virus, because you're not only affecting yourself, you're affecting all your neighbors and your friends and your loved ones. And, my biggest problem is I have a 22-year-old son that thinks he's bulletproof, same way you and I did.
Yeah.
But if he goes and gets infected and brings it back around my mother who's 73, that's not good.
No, that's right. So. Knock on wood, San Antonio has kept a lid on it a little bit so far, and I hope that keeps up. I had an epidemiologist on here, and she sort of talked about the warm and cold and does that affect, and she said it might just be because more people are indoors when it's cold, and there's a lot of unknowns as to how this is going to work.
Yeah.
Another unknown is you're a huge Spurs fan. This is how it goes. It's up and down, Michael. You're a huge Spurs fan. If the season is called, should this count as a year the Spurs miss the playoffs?
I love that. I'm the world's biggest Spurs fan. I've had front row seats forever. And this is going to be the year that we're going to miss the playoffs, and now there's no playoffs, so the streak is
so does
alive.
it count?
Yeah,
no, right?
No, it doesn't count. And the Spurs are the best run organization in the world. And as far as I'm concerned, it counts about as much as Phil Jackson's asterisk next to the 1999 championship.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, nobody's going to care.
Yeah,
there were no playoffs, so we didn't miss it. Streak alive.
Okay, I've known you for the whole time I've lived here and been really a working lawyer, and I don't know the answer to this. Is there anything outside of the law that you have a weird passion about? I mean, right now I've got a big passion about doing this podcast. Are you a woodworker? I think you're a reader. What are your big passions outside of the law?
Yeah, I'm a big sports fan. I do love that. I love to go fishing down at my fishing cabin, which is south of Baffin Bay, but I'm not very good at getting down there. My son's down there right now. He's properly socially distancing by himself and slaying the redfish, and I wish I was down there providing parental
He's down there
guidance.
solo?
He's down there with a buddy.
Okay.
Yeah, but I figure it's the safest place he can be. Just
Sure.
away from everybody else, and if he wants to go catch a bunch of fish during the
It's the middle of nowhere.
let's go. Yeah. You've been there. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so here's an important one. Which Baylor lawyer do you prefer more, me or Hunter?
Oh, God. So many good choices. Yeah, the truth of the matter is, I've told you this. I like hiring lawyers out of Baylor because they have a really good mock trial program. They teach much more practically, teach lawyers how to be lawyers. My daughter's at the University of Texas, and I love my time there, but it's more theoretical.
Sure.
They may have kids. It's the hardest law school in the state to get to, but it's much more theoretical.
Right.
It's how to be a law professor instead of how to be a lawyer.
Sure.
And so I have no problem hiring lawyers out of Baylor, and frankly, as between you and Hunter, I'm 2 for 2.
Well, thank you.
In terms of really good lawyers who know how to talk, know how to be decent people, and know how to be a hell of a lawyer.
Yeah, and Hunter listens to this, so I had to throw a jab at him in this.
Hunter's my man.
Yeah.
My partner, my friend, and I miss him. And Hunter, if you're listening, come have a cold beer with me.
He did throw a France Independence Day party last year that I went to. I don't know why or what connection that is, but he said, "Hey, I'm throwing a Bastille Day party," and so I went to it. It was fun. It was great. It was
all
French
I can
wine.
say is Hunter's snappy dressing didn't come from Mikal Watts. That is a pretty boy from the standpoint of good dressing and fabulous shoes and crazy socks. I don't know where you got that. Not from me.
Yeah. Do you do any Fiesta stuff?
You know what? It's funny. We were going to hold a big Fiesta party this year. And we had it planned, and we were inviting 100 lawyers and everything like that. And Frank,
that's weird. Mine must have got lost in the mail, I guess.
No. I don't think the invites ever went out because they were about to. And I told Frank, "Are you crazy?" Of course, I was talking to the mayor already about canceling the whole thing. And he wasn't taking it seriously. And Frank and I had a completely different initial reaction to it. And I think it's because I've spent so much time out in San Francisco. And literally in early March, I was out there working on the CAL FIRE deal, and I took a BART train, Bay Area Rapid Transit, and it was empty.
Sure.
And that city is constantly flooded, and it was like deserted. And I went back and I said, "Frank, I know you don't believe me, but this is going to get bad.
Yeah.
This state's about to shut down." He goes, "No way, da-da-da-da." So they're talking about this invite to the Fiesta party sponsored by Watts Garrett. I said, "It's never going to happen.
Yeah.
Watch." And of course it didn't.
November, though.
What's in November?
Well, Fiesta's been rescheduled.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, I think there's a shot that we're up in November.
Well, you're going to get a Justin Hill podcast Fiesta medal, the Alamo Hour Fiesta medal.
I love it.
A parting gift. Okay, what we're going to get into the meat. What do you love most about living in San Antonio?
To me, it's the best small big town in America. And what I mean by that is that when I was in Corpus Christi, it was kind of politically divided, and there was a lot of fratricide about if it wasn't my deal, I didn't want anybody else to have it. From the very minute I moved to San Antonio in August of 2006, whenever there was a new commercial success that came to the town, some deal, what I learned is nobody cared whose deal it was. It was better for the city.
Sure.
And so there's this collegiality, there's esprit de corps to this town that is very unique. And I've always said the other thing about San Antonio is it lives its life inside the hash marks. When I got here, about half the judges were Democrat, half the judges were Republican. The Democrats weren't crazy far left. The Republicans weren't crazy far right. It wasn't about political ideology. It was about what was good for the city.
Yeah.
And I like that a ton. I like the fact that it's a can-do city. It's the only city that I know in America that consistently votes for bond campaigns to use the collective purchasing power of the city to do good works and to do things like extending the Riverwalk by
Salado
12 miles.
Creek.
Yeah, all this stuff. Roads, boy, what a constant, what a crazy idea that we would have good roads. I go back to my hometown of Corpus, and the roads are just like something out of a 1950s rural area. It's nuts.
Or Houston.
So you got to continue to invest in your infrastructure. So I think that's the best thing about San Antonio. My impression is the developers got ahead of the investment in terms of the infrastructure. I mean, all that 281, 1604 stuff was just a mess. I think we're catching up, but it's a great city, and I'm proud to be a member of it.
Well, I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad you get to talk about it because there's
I like to say I'm not from here, but I got here as soon as I could.
Well, same for me, and I ain't going to leave.
No way.
Okay, so I told you beforehand I want to talk to you about multiple things. Well, I know you've done one podcast. How many podcasts have you done?
This is my second or third.
Okay, well, the one I listened to is real lawyer-based. I want to talk about that, but I want to talk about that in terms of people. I mean, you're one of the people that lives in San Antonio. I want to expose sort of San Antonio to some of our more unique citizens. So I want to talk to you about some things. I cold called you coming out of law school because when I was doing my research, I could go work at a silk stocking big building law firm that had no identity, or I could go work for the guy who was taking on car manufacturers, and I had a very personal relationship with that issue, and I thought, hell, I'm just going to call him and see what happens.
Yeah.
You had spent a lot of your early career taking on car manufacturers for what are called crashworthiness claims, and those are that cars are going to get in wrecks. You know they're going to get in wrecks, so make them safe as possible to handle those wrecks. You had done Ford, Chrysler Liftgate. By the time I worked for you, it was the very end of Ford Firestone. So I want to talk to you. You've just done so many important pieces of litigation in American history, especially in the last 30 years. Let's talk about some of the cases that have been the most important to you personally. And I mean personally, like when I worked for you, I got to work on that bus case. It was so important to me personally, from learning my clients, learning the law, gaining confidence. There was just so many parts of that case that were so important to me becoming a lawyer that I am today. Talk to me about some of the cases that were really important to you personally.
The cool thing about the law is you can take the poorest among us and take on the richest among us in a courtroom, and you're equal. All you need is a lawyer that will fight for you. And, with respect to the car stuff, I mean, I was fortunate enough to go work for a guy named David Perry, who made his fame in the Pinto post-collision fuel-fed fire litigation. So that's really all I did the first five years, is represent people whose family members were burned alive in rear-end collisions. It was just outrageous. It's because the car makers put the fuel tank behind the rear axle, and you'd have a rear-end collision, and it would go up in flames. It was stupid. So we got that fixed. All the fuel tanks were put in safe locations. And then we did, side impact. So all the doors now have bars that go along to provide a little bit more rigidity. We did frontal impact, and then we did roof crush. So we went all around the car, and now most cars have 6, 7, 8 airbags in them. It's real hard to die in a car wreck unless you're completely drunk or unbelted. And so I'm proud of that. We put ourselves out of business. Now, cars are more expensive, and I get that criticism, but the bottom line is they're safe. By and large, I got out of the car automotive product stuff, with some exceptions, about 10 years ago. And I remember at about 2008, I turned to my partners. I said, we need to get a new gig because the cars, we've complained about everything we could possibly complain about. our lawsuits have caused those to be put into the car, and they're safe. And I'm real proud of that. I am. I mean, you could go through your car, any car, and I could show you 15 safety features that weren't there when I started that are there now because of lawsuits by me and other good lawyers across the United States that force the car companies to make it safe so that when we have a crash, it's not a death sentence.
Yeah. Even I do that, and I know 5% of what you know, and I look at a car and think of all those things. Outside of sort of crashworthiness, talk to me about just some of the individual pieces of litigation, and I'm going to be selfish about it a little bit, like maybe not some of the mass actions, but some of the individual cases where you represented. Because look, if you've read King of Torts, I mean, there's the guy who's the one-off guy, there's the guy who's the mass guy. You've been both. I mean, you were the guy who represented individuals, and now you do a lot of mass work as well. Talk to me about some of the individual cases that really affected you as a person and made you a different lawyer.
Sure. So when I was a young lawyer, I represented a kid named Ruben Contreras, who was from Beeville, Texas, and he came into Corpus Christi, where I was from, and played Cal Allen high school JV game, and in the fourth quarter, lowered his neck, broke his neck in a football tackle. And what we learned is he had a crazy heavy helmet called the Bike Air Power football helmet, and it was a complete marketing gimmick that we would blow up and create these cushions, and it would protect people from head injuries. It had nothing to do. I wore one in high school. You probably did too. It was a complete marketing scam. It didn't prevent head injuries, but it added a ton of weight. So generally you had underdeveloped kids that in the fourth quarter would get tired, and they would lower their neck through no fault of their own and put the head and the neck and the body into alignment where it was like a spear, and they'd break their neck. My favorite case ever is I got that kid, Ruben Contreras, a ton of money, but about 6 weeks later I got a call from a lawyer in Austin. And 2 years minus a day before, some kid in Lubbock named Jerome Moore had broke his neck. And they said, hey, this has been through 7 law firms. Will you take a look at this? I said, sure. When did it happen? And I realized I had 12 hours to file the lawsuit. Unfortunately, I had the template, but I don't usually file lawsuits without thoroughly investigating it. But I said, you know what? There's a quadriplegic I haven't met yet in Lubbock, Texas, who's counting on me. So I filed his lawsuit sight unseen. And then I flew to Lubbock and met with him, and he was dying. He was literally in the project, Section 8 housing, no medical care because it had run out, and he was a quadriplegic who was going to die very quickly. So we stabilized him. We worked on the case for 2 years. We got him a result of many millions of dollars. And the most satisfying thing that I've ever had is he's the world's biggest Cowboys fan, as am I. And I bought him a big screen TV, which is as good as you can do. And he is now a mid-40 guy who's a quadriplegic that goes into the trauma centers and counsels other quadriplegics. Wow. And I know that but for his lawyer, he would have been dead at the age of 16, and now he is counseling a whole bunch of people and keeping them from dying from what is the most serious injury that I can imagine, quadriplegia. So that's my favorite case ever.
Life expectancy for people that have quadriplegia, if you don't have the best medical care, is not good.
Yeah, but that's the difference, right? And so my second favorite case is a lady that I was hired in 2000. It was the start of the Ford Firestone. Firestone tires had a bunch of bad tires that frankly were ordered by Ford to take out a bunch of structure to lower the center of gravity of Ford Explorers. And so what you had was a crappy tire that came apart in the heat, and then you had an Explorer that was too top-heavy that rolled over very easily. And so Donna Bailey, who is from my hometown in Corpus Christi, there was a tire detread. The Ford Explorer rolled over. The roof crushed in on her. She was a ventilator-dependent quadriplegic. I shouldn't say was because she's still alive. We settled her case in 2001 for a confidential amount, but the bottom line was an extraordinary amount of money. And I say that not to brag, but we got her enough money to take care of her for the rest of her life, 24 hours a day. She has around-the-clock nursing care. And she's still alive.
I want to share a story. You told me about her. You ran into her at a restaurant years later, and she was enjoying her life having margaritas.
She's awesome. She is the most positive attitude person. She literally for 20 years has lived out of a ventilator, but she's still alive because she has a zest for life. She has care, and she deserves everything she does. She's taken her care providers on vacations to Cozumel. She goes out.
Good for her.
She has a social life. she's the strongest person I've ever met.
And I mean, for so many people that have a less hardship, who have a hard time getting up, it's good to see people like that who've got the hardest of the hardships who are getting out.
She for 20 years she hadn't breathed by herself, but she's living more life than most of us do because she's got a heart of gold.
Good for her.
And I'm proud to keep her alive.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that I think people don't understand, that when people get good lawyers and get good representation, it changes their lives a lot of times. And yes, we make money, but the important part is Donna Bailey's out having margaritas, even though she's a ventilated quad and not in a nursing home. You know, I mean, it's
dead.
Yeah, or dead. Yeah. As it relates to those cases, because I want to talk to you about personally, because I know some of the cases you've done, how they've literally changed the way we live our day-to-day lives. But what are those, you know, we talked about Donna Bailey, we talked about Jerome Moore. How did they change you as a lawyer? How did they change the way you approach the practice of law?
Well, what you realize is practicing law is not just about money. You, as a trial lawyer, can be the difference between life and death. You can be the difference between it happening again and it never happening again. I do a lot of pharmaceutical defect cases where drugs that are rushed to the market harm people. One of my favorite clients is a lady by the name of Margarita Sanchez. She's since passed away, but her liver was destroyed by a bad drug called Resolin. I tried her case in 2002 or 3. We got this extraordinary result. And again, enough money to take care of her, but the drug was pulled, which is great. What my favorite thing is, and now that I'm an old fart, I tend to get into cases where you can make a difference, not only to the plaintiff, but to everybody else. For example, back in the Firestone cases, a lady by the name of Vicki Hendricks, her 18-year-old boy died in one of these rollovers. And we were at a mediation, and of course, I'm not known for demanding an insufficient amount of money, right? I mean, I'm pretty bold. But this lady looked at me and she goes, "I'm never settling this case. I don't care how much money until they recall this tire." And I looked at her, I said, "Ma'am, look, this is the civil justice system. Most I can get you is money. They're never going to recall this tire." She goes, "Well, I'm not settling the case." And we blew up the mediation. And by the time we got done, there were 17 million tires recalled because of Vicki Hendricks, which is awesome.
Yeah, good for her.
You know, and then in terms of everyday people, I think it's important for lawyers to have a pro bono case, a case you're doing for free at all times. And, you know, one of my favorite clients ever is a lady by the name of Kelly Knight. And a lot of you guys know Tom Henry. He had rejected her case. I'm not being critical of him. About 3 days before her statute of limitations ran, and she wheeled herself into my office crying on the day of her statute of limitations, which was 2 years after the date when she was rendered a paraplegic. But when I heard her story, her boyfriend was kind of one of these guys that beats up people, got mad at her and threw her off of a second-floor balcony, which fractured her spine, rendering her a lifetime paraplegic. And so I took her case pro bono, said I wouldn't charge her. We tried the case against this bastard that threw her over, and she won a $144 million judgment.
When was this?
2002 or 3. She never recovered a dollar, but the guy's been sitting in prison for a while and like that. He's got a judgment. We still chase him. She'll never get a dollar. But having a jury of her peers tell her that this man needed to be punished because he had a good lawyer that got him out of a lot of criminal stuff was the most rewarding client day of my life. She was so thankful. Still a friend of hers on Facebook. But, you know, I'm thinking about those ladies, and there was no bigger Bill Cosby fan than Mikal Watts. I think he's the funniest guy I've ever seen. You know, the story about telling his kids that, you know, in his day he walked to school 6 miles uphill both ways. I mean, he was so talented, but he was also a serial rapist that used drugs to incapacitate women. He deserved what he got in the same way that Harvey Weinstein deserved what he got. And I can't look myself in the eye as somebody who has a wife that had an experience that was difficult, a daughter who I'm trying to raise as a strong woman. And so I think the law in defense of women's rights is important. And then the other area that obviously is very personal to me now is the rights of criminals or suspected criminals in our criminal justice system. I try to keep one of those cases going pro bono. And let me just tell you a story. Back in about 2006, I got a call
from this right here
from a federal judge.
Pull it down.
And It was Jan Jack in Corpus Christi, Texas. And she said, "Hey, I'm appointing you to represent so-and-so." And I was like, ugh. And we've all gotten that call where a judge tells you you're going to do it and you can't say no. And so I was upset about that. But anyway, the case turned out it was a guy who was serving life in prison. His name was Ciro Adames, and he was convicted of, in effect, rape, although he didn't do it. He was in the car as an accessory to rape when somebody was burglarizing a house, and whoever his high school buddy was raped this lady. And so they were both convicted of rape, and this guy that was sitting in the car outside was sentenced to life in prison. While he was in the Beeville Penitentiary, he apparently turned in some guy that was bringing drugs into the prison. Turned out the guy was bringing drugs into the prison at the behest of the warden.
Oh,
and so he filed what's called a 1983 case, a civil rights case, because he got stabbed 17 times for being a snitch. And the federal judge, Jan Jack, got so pissed off at the Attorney General of the state of Texas for the way they were acting, she said, "I'm going to hire the best lawyer I know to defend this guy." And she calls me up. So we try his case. It took me 3 days. We got an actual damages verdict and a punitive damages verdict for a guy serving life in prison against a warden.
When was this?
It was probably 2006. So the Fifth Circuit takes it away. It turned into a complete waste of time, I thought. And then after my criminal law experience, I get a call, and it's from Ciro Adames. And I'm like, well, how could he be out? He's serving life in prison. Well, he served 25 years and was let out on parole. And the bottom line is that I went to meet Ciro in Houston, and they were trying to register him as a sex offender, even though he was sitting in the car outside. So I took on his case pro bono. It took me 5 hearings. We won against the Bureau of Prisons or the Bureau of whatever. So he's not registered as a sex offender because he never was. The guy got married. He told me during the last hearing, he goes, "You know why I know so much about the law?" I said, "No." He goes, "Because those 3 days you spent with me in 2006. He goes, "I was a little vato. I mean, all I did was cared about the gang life." And he said, I got rid of that. I went to high school while I was in prison. I went to college while I was in prison, and I got a paralegal license.
Good for him.
And Ciro Adames married somebody who stood by him and now lives in San Antonio, Texas, and a paralegal in this town, and as good a guy as anybody you've ever met. But he had a lawyer that stuck up with him, for him, and now he's a contributing member of this town who nobody should be worried about. He got completely shafted by a bad lawyer when he was 17 years old, sitting out in a car. So my point is our criminal justice system is full of people like that. I don't care whether you're a 17-year-old punk named Ciro Adames or you're a state senator named Carlos Uresti, who some guy decides he's going to take a scalp. I have, as you know, sincere doubts that my friend Carlos Uresti, who's serving 12 years in a federal penitentiary, deserves to spend a day there.
Yeah.
But what everybody needs is a lawyer. I agreed to be his lawyer for free and was disqualified, which breaks my heart. But 2 good men that should have never been put through the criminal justice system.
I think that's important to talk about, because if somebody Googles Mikal Watts, some of the articles that pop up are going to be your representation of Senator Uresti, Carlos Uresti. To give some color to this, you didn't just represent Carlos. You go visit him in prison now.
Yeah, I do.
You stay in touch with him. He's a friend of yours. You did your best, and the judge disqualified you. Why did you agree to take on Carlos's case?
Some of it was, after my case, and we haven't said it yet, but I got indicted for 95 counts of conspiracy, identity theft, aggravated identity theft, mail fraud, wire fraud, involving the BP litigation. Didn't do it. It was very confusing, very discombobulating, very upsetting that you're tried in the court of public opinion. You're convicted in the court of public opinion before you ever have your day in court. Everybody just thinks you're screwed, because otherwise why would they come after you? So in 2013, my offices were raided right here in San Antonio, and I became a pariah for 2.5, 3 years. And then when we didn't think anything was going to happen, because we didn't do it, a U.S. Senator from Wisconsin, Ron Johnson, the head of the Homeland Securities Committee, thought it was part of his charge to tell the Attorney General of the United States, "Hey, Mikal Watts is a big contributor to Democrats, had Obama at his house, is a ready for Hillary guy, gives a lot of money. That's why you're not indicting him. You should indict him. This is right after Loretta Lynch was on the airplane with Bill Clinton, so she recused herself. So some local United States attorney from Mississippi trying to make a name for himself says, I'm going to indict this big trial lawyer and I'm going to take him down. So all of a sudden I'm indicted. You are tried and convicted in the court of public opinion. And then when you finally get your day in court, it was nonsense. We didn't do it. Represented myself against the might and the weight of the United States government, and it was a debacle for them. I mean, it wasn't even a fair fight. I know I'm supposed to brag about how I beat Clarence Darrow himself, but it was a joke.
But let's go back a second, if you don't mind. I mean, look, I worked for you, and I think I left in October. I think the raids happened in February. Mm-hmm. We kind of heard bits and pieces. And, I mean, I do agree with you. It becomes this weird public opinion thing where you just hear you get this weird mix mash of people who want you to win and he's the best, and then people are like, oh yeah, he's terrible. I mean, it really was strange. I mean, just because I knew you personally, to hear sort of the hubbub, what was the personal experience of being indicted by the feds?
It was devastating. I mean, number one, you realize that you have a lot fewer friends, true friends, than you thought you had.
Sure. But
you have a lot better friends than you thought you had. So in other words, while you think you're friends with 500 people, you're really friends with 5 or 6. But those 5 or 6 rise up, and those are the guys that you want to run through a wall with. And so we did that. And then one of the great things that I'm proud of is I had 130 people that worked for me at the time. Not one of them left. Our friend Hunter left the firm, but in a completely amicable fashion.
Sure.
We're very good friends to this day. And I'm really proud of that.
He was leaving separate and apart.
Yeah, I mean, great lawyer, going to do his own thing. But the point is that people stood by me, and that was rewarding. And then when you finally get your day in court, I thought it was going to be this complete and total nationally covered exoneration, and 35 members of the press are there for opening statement, and they all go home. Huh. It's just bizarre. So what really happens is people think, oh, that rich guy got off, but they don't understand that the charges themselves were nonsense. Yeah. So it's one of the reasons that I did something crazy during that trial. I hired a film crew. We shot 700 hours of video every night in the car to and from courthouses, interviewed ourselves because I want to do a video documentary on Netflix to show people what it's like for an American citizen to be falsely indicted by his government and to tell the story. Because if you don't tell the story, it'll happen again and again. So we're writing books, we're doing a movie, and we're going to tell the story, and we're going to advocate for criminal justice reform because what they did was outrageous.
And just to provide some background, this is the 10th anniversary of the BP explosion. I'll post the Atlantic article. I mean, it's a public. You don't have any problem with me posting the article. It gives a sort of background of what happened and sort of what the next thing was. BP explosion happened. You represented a bunch of fishermen, and then it turned out that the people that were helping you sign up cases were not doing that, but they were taking your money. Indicted for representing people that turned out to not be real clients.
Some of them were, but the bottom line is I got stolen from, and then the guys that stole from me made up Social Security numbers and the like, stole Social Security numbers, and then everybody just assumed that I was involved, which I wasn't.
Yeah, the Atlantic article did a really good job of sort of lining out how much money they took from you. The guys that ended up going to prison enriched themselves personally from your pocket to the tune of a couple $1 million.
More like 10.
Yeah. I wasn't going to say it.
Yeah, it was fun. You get robbed of $10 million and then get indicted by your government for being stolen from.
Yeah. So the raids happen, then a big break in time, then the indictment happens. Once you got indicted, what was sort of because I know it was all hands on deck. How did you proceed to take on the feds? Because early on you were represented. So before that, what was your sort of strategy and how did you plan to go about it? I mean, obviously you didn't do it. You were acquitted, but the full force and might of the federal government coming after you is a pretty heady thing, and you've got to really kind of batten down and figure out how you want to go about it.
Yeah, the entire United States Secret Service, I mean, I always thought they just defended the president, but they also do financial crimes, and they are sorry. They investigated, they interviewed over 1,600 people. They spent over $10 million.
Wait, they investigated 1,600 people on your case?
Yeah. I mean, they spent over $10 million trying to get Mikal Watts. But the bottom line is it takes one opportunistic federal prosecutor. In this case, the guy's name was John Dowdy. His family came from political, this or that. He's in Mississippi. I'm sure he wanted to be governor. He's got a safe target, a trial lawyer from out of state. President Obama had been at my house for a fundraiser in the summer of 2012, and those guys were just fixated on the idea that I was an Obama guy. And so what they did is they raided my offices. They lied to witnesses. They told people I'd stolen their money when I didn't even have any money. The settlement hadn't even happened yet. They played all sorts of games. In the federal rules of procedure, they got to tell you what their trial exhibits are going to be. And instead of telling me what they're going to be, they dumped 42 boxes and 4 million pages of documents and said, go find them. Fortunately, I had the resources to do it. I had 18 people working around the clock. And they said, oh, yeah, we're going to use them all. And then over a 5-week trial, there were 152 exhibits used. But I had to spend 9 months, millions of dollars reading through a bunch of junk. And then they withheld a bunch of stuff. There's a doctrine in the law known as Brady, where they have to provide you with exculpatory information. They withheld all of that. And so they played all sorts of games that were just outrageous. And it's hard to imagine that here in the United States that happens, but I am convinced that while the prisons have plenty of people that are guilty, they're also full of people that either got screwed by the government or just didn't have the resources to fight the considerable might of the government.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think people realize how much latitude a federal prosecutor is given to do what they want to do. I mean, if they decide they want to go after somebody, they get an investigatory arm, they get a budget, and they get to do it.
Yeah, and then most of them have judges that completely just look the other way. Some judges get after them, but my judge, we complain. It was like we weren't even there. He was a former prosecutor. But to be fair, once that trial started, he gave me a fair trial, and I thank the Lord every day for Louis Garola, because for 5.5 weeks he treated me with dignity during that trial, and I wrote him a letter afterwards telling him that.
Did he respond?
No, but I did hear that
he got it.
He got it, and he was pleased to get it. But I mean, he's an honorable guy.
So let's talk about some of the games they play. I mean, they had to give you their trial exhibits 30 days before trial. Is that correct?
Supposed to, but they said basically it's 4 million pages of documents.
Yeah,
they
right.
Put 152 documents into evidence. It was ridiculous.
And there's no recourse for that. I mean, that's the crazy thing. I mean, they also indicted your brother. They indicted some people from your law firm. And they moved venue on you.
Yeah. What they try to do is they try to indict everybody in your family so you'll fold. One of the hardest conversations I ever had was telling my big brother, who did nothing wrong, who was indicted solely for the offense of being Mikal Watts' brother, that I'm not going to fold. And I'm sorry that you're having to go through this, but you're going to have to ride the rail with me. And that sucked because he didn't do anything wrong. One of my paralegals, who did nothing more than send a computer file that I told her to send to a law firm in Chicago, was indicted. They were just trying to put pressure on people to roll over and help them prove a false case against Mikal Watts. And to their great credit, all of my employees, former employees, they stood tall and told the truth.
And I don't really know what I'm allowed to ask and not ask, but there's a lot of hubbub. Did they ever try to cut a deal with you or try to get, hey, we'll be...
That's where I give my wife a lot of credit. My wife is a black and white, right or wrong person, and I never even had to ask. With 95 counts and aggravated identity theft that is a mandatory 2-year concurrent sentence, if they ran the table on me, I was in jail for the rest of my life.
Oh.
And... that's the other problem. People hear about a 98% conviction rate. Well, it's because a whole bunch of people fold because they're out of money. Their money is seized. They've got co-employees rolling on them left and right because they're fearful, And so my wife said, we're not pleading to anything. You didn't do it. I know you didn't do it. And so you're literally riding the rail knowing that if you're wrong, you go to jail for the rest of your life. But I had great faith. I've been in front of so many juries. Juries... they get it right.
Yeah.
I mean, there was no better BS detector ever invented than 24 eyes of your fellow citizens looking at evidence.
Yeah.
And in this case, you asked about games that they were playing. I mean, the bottom line is I was indicted by a grand jury in Jackson, Mississippi, which is a heavily Democratic area. This is where the prosecutors got too cute. They knew I was a big ready for Hillary, Obama giver, big Democratic giver. So I think they made the judgment, we got to get it the hell out of Jackson. So they indicted me and placed it in front of a federal judge in Gulfport, which is the most Republican county in the state of Mississippi. And
when I worked for you, we had a case in Gulfport.
Yeah, well, Gulfport's a great case. But, bottom line is they were playing games, and it's one of the great testaments of the American jury system that I had a jury of 11 of 12 consistent Republican primary voters. All you had to do was Google Mikal Watts and see I was on the other side. And these people, sat there for 4.5 weeks, looked at all the evidence, did the right thing, rendered their verdict, convicted the people that did it, and then, a lot of them are going to be in the documentary. Yeah, 4 or 5 of them are Facebook friends with me. They're just the best guys. They're the best people ever. Joey McQueen. A bunch of folks. They're just my dearest of friends now, and they were my liberators. But we have no shared political ideology, and we all know it. They're big Trumpists, and I tease them about it, but I love them, and I'll be at their funerals. And I just think it's the greatest thing in the world about America, regardless of what your political ideology is. My experience has been when you bring jurors in and you present facts to them to a T, they rise to the occasion. They try to do the right thing.
Did the Fed, so I worked for you, so everybody in the legal world would ask me questions about your case. Like I didn't know anything about it. But I did know that if you pled to a felony, even one felony, you probably lose your law license.
Absolutely lose your law license.
So did they offer anything? Did they ever get down to
I made it clear when I showed up, I looked the guy right in the eye. I said, don't even talk to me about plea bargains because I'm not pleading to shit.
Yeah.
And that's what I told him.
Good for you.
Said, and oh, by the way, you're going to be embarrassed you ever brought these charges.
I tell people, like, if you're not a lawyer, you don't really understand. Representing yourself is the dumbest thing you can do, sort of, in our industry. We joke, if you represent...
says Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah, right. You have a fool for a client. You not only represented yourself, you were fully exonerated on, by the time I went to trial, 60 felonies?
66, and so was my brother, and so was Winter Lee, my paralegal, so 198 not guilties in a row.
And you were already, you were fully established as a legend in our profession prior to this, and I just joke like that's a different echelon. Representing yourself against the feds on 66 felonies and walking it. It's you have to be a lawyer and be in the legal industry to sort of understand the import of what that is. When you decided to represent yourself, everybody obviously told you you're an idiot to do that. Yeah, right.
But look, to be honest, you could strike it up to some slick trial lawyer that talked his way out of a jam, but it really helped that we didn't do it.
Yeah,
all the good lawyering in the world. I tell people, great civil trial lawyers do not turn defeats into victories. They turn victories into big victories.
Sure.
And in this case, I didn't win because I was the best lawyer in the courtroom. I won because we didn't do it.
Yeah.
We proved it.
And I think it was important. You've made that reference multiple times and things I've heard you say in interviews that representing yourself allowed you to talk directly to a jury.
That's why I did it.
Yeah.
It wasn't an ego play. It was a thought that if they saw me arguing my case every day, it would humanize me over the course of 4.5 weeks. And it turned out to be a good move. I wouldn't recommend it for a whole lot of people. Not because they're not Mikal Watts. It's just in that particular case, the theory was I committed fraud to get on a committee that I wouldn't otherwise be on. The prosecutors just didn't do their work. The bottom line is that we showed that I'd been on a bunch of those committees. We showed that I'd run a bunch of those committees. And the fact that the jury saw that I was a real lawyer, that helped too.
And John Dowdy, who indicts you, he decides to split right before you go to trial, right?
Yeah, he quit. I think what happened is that it's so typical for these guys to roll over everybody, indict the brother, indict the paralegal, get everybody all scared to death. They all plead because they can't afford to do it. So I had to bankroll a lot of defenses, which wasn't any fun. So that's unusual. But
Mike McCrum, a local lawyer.
Oh, my God. Mike McCrum was, people say, oh, Watts represented himself. That's bullshit. Mike McCrum told me he was the boss, okay? When I tried to do something, he just whacked me on the knuckles like one of those.
Well, I don't say it's bullshit, but when people's like he represented, he's also got Mike McCrum as one of the best.
Mike McCrum was my best choice. Bottom line, he's one of the great criminal trial lawyers in Texas. Yeah. And the best thing that ever happened is I had a couple of friends that recommended him, and he was in trial 3 days after my officers were raided. And I went down and watched him in trial, and he just eviscerated somebody on cross-examination. And I was like, that's my guy.
Yeah.
And now he's my very good friend. If anybody got in a jam, I'd tell him, hire Mike McCrum.
If you can afford it.
Well, he ain't cheap, but he's worth it,
Okay, so now you've sort of taken up the mantle of criminal justice reform. 2 minutes?
2 minutes. Gotta get on.
Okay.
Yeah.
You've sort of taken up the mantle of criminal justice reform. What are some of the things you're doing to try to help the criminal justice system?
Well, there's three things. The plan was that Hillary Clinton was going to win, and then we'd do a bunch of criminal justice reform in 2017. Well, obviously Trump lost. Trump won. His son-in-law, Jared Kushner, his father was rightfully or wrongfully convicted and spent time in federal prison. So there has been some good stuff. Trump passed what's called the First Step Act, which reduced some of these crazy sentences. So that was good. But by and large, we're writing a book. We're doing a film documentary. The presidential election will be over, and I'm working real hard to elect Joe Biden.
When are the book and movie coming out?
The book's ready. The movie's not. We're working through it. But the bottom line is you're not going to get a lot of what I call criminal procedural reform unless and until Joe Biden's elected president, which I think is about to happen.
I think so too. Michael, you've got a call to get on. Thank you for being here. Whenever the book or documentary comes out, will you come back on?
Absolutely.
Okay, you can have more Miller Lite when you come back on.
That sounds good, buddy.
Okay, that about does it for this episode of The Alamo. A huge thanks to Mikal Watts for coming here. He's got a million things going on: the fires, the jewel cases, the COVID Princess Cruise Line cases. All the major torts. Watts is involved. His website's wattsguerra.com. On our next episode, we're going to be talking with another local lawyer who's sort of taken up the mantle of representing the sort of underrepresented, non-English speaking Spanish workers in town and around South Texas. And it's going to be an interesting discussion to talk about a young immigrant who came up as a plaintiff's lawyer, and now he's taken on the mantle of representing other immigrants. Our guest wish list continues. Michael, if you can get Coach Pop to come on here, I'd love you. So guest wish list continues. Coach Pop, Robert Rivard's coming on already. He's already agreed to that. Jackie Earl Haley, we'd love to get you on. And Ron Nirenberg. Hey, I've reached out to you. Yeah, he's doing a great job.
Wrote about my trial.
Yeah, he was sort of doing a daily thing, right? Yeah. Well, Robert's coming on early May. He's already agreed to do that. He was original wish list, and maybe I'll ask him about it.
There you go.
So that does it for this episode. Thank you, Michael. This will be posted soon, and we'll see you next time.
All right, buddy. Thank you for having me on. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Alamo Hour. You are all what make this city so great. We hope you join us next week. In the meantime, subscribe to our podcast. Check us out on Facebook at facebook.com/Alamo Hour or our website, alamohour.com. Until next time, Viva San Antonio!